Ever get that feeling, like you're just drowning in negativity? Like it's everywhere you turn, online, at work, heck, even just like inside your own head sometimes.
Yeah.
It's, it's exhausting, right? Mentally and emotionally. It's like junk food for the soul. Easy to consume in the moment, but then you're left feeling, well, kind of gross and unhappy. But what if I told you we could be just as mindful about the information we consume as we are about, the food we eat? Because toxic communication is a real thing, and it can be just as damaging to our well-being as, a steady diet of anything deep fried. So, in this deep dive, we're going to be exploring this idea of communicating with compassion. And we're going to be taking inspiration from the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk and peace activist who really championed this concept of right speech.
Mm.
Now, before you tune out thinking this is going to be some kind of like preachy self-help thing, it's not about that at all. It's more about like how we can use communication as a tool for nourishment and healing, both for ourselves and, for the people around us. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh had this really interesting analogy about a kill with a skin disease. Yeah. I know, sounds kind of random, right? But stick with me here. He said that without its skin, the cow is super vulnerable to all sorts of things, right? Insects, infections, all that nasty stuff. And he argued that mindfulness is like our skin when it comes to communication. Without it, we just absorb all that negativity, judgment, and anger that's just like flying around out there. And it starts to fester. You know what I mean? It affects our mood, our relationships, even our physical health. It's like we're letting those emotional toxins just seep right in. This really hit home for me the other day. I was doom scrolling on social media, as one does. And I just got sucked into this vortex of like angry comments and political rants. And I realized like halfway through that, my whole mood had just tanked. It was like I was literally carrying the weight of all that negativity in my body. It was a serious wake-up call. I was like, okay, I need to be way more mindful of what I'm letting into my mental space. And it's not just the stuff we actively seek out either. So like all that communication we passively absorb throughout the day, ads, news headlines, overheard conversations at the coffee shop, it all seeps in, whether we realize it or not. So being mindful of our communication intake is kind of like curating a healthy media diet for our minds. So how do we actually do this? How do we cultivate this mindfulness in our communication? Well, Thich Nhat Hanh talked a lot about the importance of what he called coming home to ourselves. I know that might sound a little woo-woo, but it basically means reconnecting with our breath, our body, and our feelings in the present moment. It's like hitting the pause button, just taking a moment to reset and be present. He suggested practicing things like mindful breathing and mindful walking. Sounds simple, right? But just paying attention to your breath as you inhale and exhale, or feeling your feet connect with the ground as you walk, it can really ground you in the present moment. It's like a mini meditation on the go. And honestly, I've tried this, and it's actually kind of amazing how much of a difference it makes.
Like even just taking a few deep breaths before, say, a difficult conversation can help me approach the situation with way more calmness and clarity. Because when we're grounded and present, we're less likely to react impulsively or say something we'll regret later, right? We're more likely to really listen with an open heart and respond with kindness and understanding. Even when it's tough, it makes sense when you think about it. Like Thich Nhat Hanh said, if we can't communicate well with ourselves, how can we communicate well with another person? It's all connected. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of right speech and how we can actually put it into practice, let's take a moment to come home to ourselves, just like Thich Nhat Hanh suggested. Close your eyes for a few seconds. It's okay. I'll wait. And just notice your breath. Feel that rise and fall of your chest, the gentle flow of air in and out. Just be present in this moment. No judgment, no agenda, just being. Okay. Ready to explore how we can bring this sense of inner peace into our everyday communication. Okay, so we've talked about mindfulness. Creating that inner space where we can respond to the world instead of just reacting to it. But how do we actually, put this compassionate communication into practice? Like in real life with real people who, let's be honest, can sometimes be a real pain. Well, Thich Nhat Hanh
offered these 6 mantras. He called them magic formulas, which might sound a little cheesy, but they're actually pretty powerful little reminders. And they're super simple, which is always a plus in my book. The first one is, I am here for you. Okay, on the surface, pretty basic, right? But when you really think about it, how often are we actually fully present, like truly there for the people we're interacting with? And I don't just mean physically, but like mentally and emotionally too. This mantra is a reminder to offer our full presence, to really listen, to pay attention. It's like saying, you matter. I'm here with you in this moment.
Hey, I remember this one time a friend of mine was going through like a really rough breakup. And I could have easily just offered some generic advice, patted her on the back and moved on. But I said to try this mantra out.
I just sat with her, listened to her pain, and said, I'm here for you. And it made such a difference. She felt heard, seen, and supported. Sometimes that's all we really need. The second mantra is, I know you were there and I'm very happy. This one is all about acknowledging the other person's existence and like expressing appreciation for them. It's so easy to take the people we love for granted, right? You get caught up in routines and to-do lists, and we forget to just like savor those connections, to
Yeah.
appreciate the simple joy of having these people in our lives. This mantra is a reminder to pause and just be grateful for their presence. Like imagine if they weren't there anymore. Kind of more did I know. But it can really shift your perspective. I even use this mantra with my dog sometimes. Obviously, he doesn't understand the words, but I think he gets the feeling, he wags his tail and gives me those puppy dog eyes. Okay, the third mantra is for when you can tell that someone you care about is hurting. It's, I know you are suffering and that makes me suffer. This one is all about acknowledging their pain and expressing empathy. It's like saying, I see your pain and I care. Sometimes just knowing that someone else gets it, that they're not dismissing your feelings, can make a world of difference, right? It creates this sense of connection and shared understanding. It can be tough to do this, though, especially when you feel like you might be partly responsible for their suffering. It takes humility and a willingness to own your actions, but ultimately it's about recognizing our shared humanity and offering support. The fourth mantra is, I suffer. Please help. This one can be hard, like really hard, especially if you're the kind of person who's used to, putting on a brave face and soldiering on. But it's so important to acknowledge our own vulnerability, to admit when we need help and to ask for it. We don't have to do everything alone, right? I know this guy who struggles with anxiety. He always tried to hide it, pretend everything was fine. But one day he finally broke down and told his partner, I suffer, please help. And it was like a turning point for him. It allowed him to let go of that need to be strong all the time and to finally receive the support he needed. All right, mantra number 5 is, this is a happy moment. Now, this one might seem a little counterintuitive, especially when things are less than ideal. But it's about recognizing that even in the midst of difficult times, there's still things to be grateful for, moments of joy to be found. It's about choosing to focus on the good, even when it feels hard. Like even when I'm feeling super stressed or overwhelmed, I can look around and find something, anything to appreciate. The sun shining through the trees, a good cup of coffee, my dog snoring on the couch. It's a little reminder that happiness is often a choice, a matter of perspective. And finally, we have mantra number 6. You are partly right. This one is all about embracing both praise and criticism with, a healthy dose of humility and a willingness to learn. It's about recognizing that nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. And there's always room for growth. When someone praises us, it's easy to get all puffed up, right? But this mantra reminds us to stay grounded, to acknowledge that we still have things to learn. And when someone criticizes us, it's tempting to get defensive, to dismiss their feedback. But this mantra encourages us to listen with an open mind, to see if there's any truth in what they're saying, and to use it as an opportunity to grow. So these 6 mantras, as simple as they are, can be really powerful tools for transforming the way we communicate. They're like little reminders to approach our interactions with mindfulness, compassion, and a willingness to connect on a deeper level. And even if we stumble sometimes, even if we forget to use them, just remembering their essence can make a difference in the way we communicate with ourselves and the people around us. So we've explored these mantras, but how do we apply them in those, really tricky situations where communication can get messy and emotions run high? So we've covered a lot, haven't we? We talked about mindful communication as nourishment, that whole coming home to ourselves thing, and those 6 mantras for, well, speaking with more compassion. But let's be real for a sec. Life's not some peaceful meditation retreat, right? Things get messy, we butt heads, and sometimes those communication breakdowns, well, they hit hard. So how do we deal with those really tough situations?
You know those times when you just want to chuck those mindful communication principles out the window and just let loose? Well, Thich Nhat Hanh stressed that even, or maybe especially, in those heated moments, compassionate communication is key. He talked about recognizing our own anger, not letting it control us, like understanding that anger is often a sign of something deeper going on, some hurt or unmet need. And instead of just reacting, lashing out, we can try to communicate that need with kindness and clarity. It's not always easy, but it's something to aim for, right? And then there's listening, really listening, even when, or maybe especially when, we totally disagree with what the other person's saying. It's about trying to see their perspective, even if it seems completely bonkers to us. Because often underneath those angry words or hurtful actions, there's some kind of pain or fear driving their behavior. And when we can tap into that empathy, it can open the door to real understanding and maybe even reconciliation. Thich Nhat Hanh had this practice he called beginning anew. It's about acknowledging past hurts, expressing remorse, and making a conscious choice to communicate more mindfully going forward. It's not about burying stuff or pretending everything's peachy. It's about facing those tough emotions and finding a way to move forward with compassion and understanding. It's like, think about a time you had a massive fight with your partner or your best friend or even your mom. Maybe you said something you totally regretted or they did something that really stung. Now imagine if you could rewind and approach that moment differently. What would you say? How will you listen? How could you shift things from attack and defend to something more constructive, more compassionate? Thich Nhat Hanh even suggested creating a sort of peace treaty with your loved ones, a written agreement to communicate more mindfully and support each other in this. It's a good reminder that communication is a two-way street, right? It takes effort and commitment from everyone involved. And this isn't just for our personal relationships. Thich Nhat Hanh talked about applying these principles in the workplace, in our communities, even in those supercharged political debates that seem to dominate everything these days. He believed that compassionate communication could help us bridge those divides, understand each other better, and create a more peaceful world. It's a pretty inspiring vision, right? I mean, it's not always easy to live up to this stuff. It takes constant effort, patience, and a willingness to keep showing up, even when it's hard. But I think it's worth shooting for, because when we communicate with compassion, it creates this ripple effect of kindness that can spread out, touching the people around us in ways we may not even realize. So if you could pick just one of these teachings to focus on this week, which would it be and why? How can you bring a little more mindfulness and compassion into your interactions today? Just something to ponder. And thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the art of communicating with compassion.